President Trump, you nominated Amy Coney Barrett over the weekend to succeed the late Ruth Bader Ginsburg on the court. You say the Constitution is clear about your obligation and the Senate's to consider a nominee to the court. Vice President Biden, you say that this is an effort by the president and Republicans to jam through an appointment and what you call an abuse of power. My first question to both of you tonight: why are you right in the argument you make and your opponent wrong? And where do you think a Justice Barrett would take the court? President Trump, in this first segment, you go first. 2 minutes.
Thank you very much, Chris. I will tell you very simply, we won the election. Elections have consequences. We have the Senate, we have the White House, and we have a phenomenal nominee, respected by all, top academic, good in every way, In fact, some of her biggest endorsers are very liberal people from Notre Dame and other places. So I think she's going to be fantastic. We have plenty of time, even if we did it after the election itself. I have a lot of time after the election, as you know. So I think that she will be outstanding. She's going to be as good as anybody that has served on that court. We really feel that. We have a professor at Notre Dame, highly respected by all, said she's the single greatest student he's ever had. He's been a professor for a long time at a great school. And we won the election, and therefore we have the right to choose her. And very few people knowingly would say otherwise. And by the way, the Democrats, they wouldn't even think about not doing it. If they had, the only difference is they'd try and do it faster. There's no way they would give it up. They had Merrick Garland, but the problem is they didn't have the election, so they were stopped. And probably that would happen in reverse also. Definitely would happen in reverse. So we won the election, and we have the right to do it, Chris.
The American people have a right to have a say in who the Supreme Court nominee is. And that say occurs when they vote for United States senators and when they vote for the President of the United States. They're not going to get that chance now because we're in the middle of an election already. The election has already started. Tens of thousands of people have already voted. And so the thing that should happen is we should wait. We should wait and see what the outcome of this election is, because that's the only way the American people get to express their view is by who they elect as president and who they elect as vice president. Now, what's at stake here is the president's made it clear he wants to get rid of the Affordable Care Act. He's been running on that, he ran on that, and he's been governing on that.
Mr. Hawkins, the same question to you. What are your thoughts on the nomination of Amy Coney Barrett and this opening on the Supreme Court?
Well, Trump and the Republicans are huge hypocrites. When Merrick Garland was nominated, it was 8 months before an election, and they said that's too soon. We have to have the election first. Now they're trying to ram through the Amy Coney Barrett nomination a month before the election. And so they got a big problem right there. You know, Lincoln had a vacancy a month before an election during the Civil War, and he waited until the election was over before making his appointment. The Democrats, they're just rolling over for the Republicans. They're not fighting back. If I was in there, I would say impeach Donald Trump and Attorney General Barr for trying to undermine this election by saying the mail-in ballots are fraudulent, by undermining the post office so the mail-in ballots won't get there. And that's just for starters. Trump has a rap sheet a mile long that was not used when he was impeached before. He has hurt workers and consumers and the environment, and the American public in an impeachment indictment should find out all the things he has done in that regard, and that would mobilize them behind it. Trump has a rap sheet a mile long. He's encouraged law enforcement agencies to break the law. He's gutted federal agencies like the Environmental Protection Agency and the Occupational Safety and Health Agency in violation of their congressional mandate, the legislation that established them. So if they impeach Trump, that would take precedence in procedures in the Senate before a Supreme Court nomination, which means the Democrats could run out the clock and let the voters decide who they want in the next government and let them make the decision about the next Supreme Court nominee. Now, the nominee that Trump has put forward is a hard right nominee. She's against abortion rights. She's not a strong advocate of civil rights. She will probably get rid of the Affordable Care Act and the protections it provides, as limited as they are from our point of view. And she will reinforce what the whole Supreme Court now does, is bow down before corporate power, as opposed to the regulations that protect workers and consumers and the environment. So it's a nomination that should not go forward until there's an election.
The economy is, I think it's fair to say, recovering faster than expected from the shutdown.
Much faster.
In the second quarter, the unemployment rate fell to 8.4% last month. The Federal Reserve says the hit to growth, which is going to be there, is not going to be nearly as big as they had expected. President Trump, you say we are in a V-shaped recovery. Vice President Biden, you say it's more of a K-shape. What difference does that mean to the American people in terms of the economy? President Trump, in this segment, you go first.
So we built the greatest economy in history. We closed it down because of the China plague. When the plague came in, we closed it down, which was very hard psychologically to do. He didn't think we should close it down, and he was wrong. And again, 2 million people would be dead now instead of still 204,000 people is too much. One person is too much. Should have never happened from China. But what happened is we closed it down, and now we're reopening, and we're doing record business. We had 10.4 million people in a 4-month period that we've put back into the workforce. That's a record the likes of which nobody's ever seen before. And he wants to close down he will shut it down again. He will destroy this country. You know, a lot of people, between drugs and alcohol and depression, when you start shutting it down, you take a look at what's happening in some of your Democrat-run states where they have these tough shutdowns. And I'm telling you, it's because they don't want to open it. One of them came out last week. You saw that. Oh, we're going to open up on November 9th. Why November 9th? Because it's after the election. They think they're hurting us by keeping them closed. They're hurting people.
The difference is millionaires and billionaires like him in the middle of the COVID crisis have done very well. Billionaires have made another $300 billion because of his profligate tax proposal, and he only focused on the market. But you folks at home, you folks living in Scranton and Claymont and all the small towns and working class towns in America, how well are you doing? This guy paid a total of $750 in taxes.
Sir, wait, no, sir, it's just
wrong statement.
Yeah, I understand. You've agreed to the 2 minutes, so please let him have it.
Do I get my time back? The fact is that he has, in fact, worked on this in a way that he's going to be the first president of the United States to leave office having fewer jobs in his administration than when he became president. Fewer jobs than when he became president. First one in American history. Secondly, the people who have lost their jobs are those people who have been on the front lines, those people who have been saving our lives, those people who have been out there dying, people who've been putting themselves in the way to make sure that we could all try to make it.
Mr. Hawkins, what are your thoughts on the U.S. economy both before and after COVID-19? You have made income inequality a major element of your campaign. What would a Hawkins administration do differently in approaching the economy?
Well, first of all, we have to understand Trump is a loser. COVID won. He's running around like Typhoid Mary. And now the chickens have come home to roost. And he got sick, and his inner circle got sick in his campaign and in the White House. And along the way, he wrecked the economy, as well as over 200,000 lives of people that died. You know, if he wasn't such a dummy, he would have listened to the public health officials, and he could have run on this, like every other organized society in the world that did what we need to do now. And that is to ramp up testing, contact tracing, and isolating those exposed or infected so we can suppress community spread of the virus and go back to work and to school safely. Instead, Trump wants to scapegoat China. He calls it the China plague, which is racist, and puts a target on the backs of Asian Americans who have suffered attacks from people in the communities since he started doing that. And that isn't about economic recovery. That's about dividing the people and trying to mobilize his base. And then, of course, every time Trump's lips move, he's lying. All that stuff about the greatest economy ever is nonsense. The jobs created under Trump have largely been low income, part-time, insecure, no benefits. And there are actually less people working now because labor force participation is down. So you're getting a little downtick in the unemployment rate, but they're not counting people that have left the labor force because the prospects of employment are so dim. Now, where Biden and Trump agree is that they agree on trickle-down economics. Give more money to rich folks. And supposedly they'll take that money and invest and create jobs. Trump had his tax cuts. Biden's calling for more targeted tax cuts and subsidies for corporations. But the money doesn't trickle down. We've had 45 years of stagnant wages, and now they're down further in this COVID depression. The demand isn't there. Rich folks get that money. They don't invest in new productive assets, new factories, new jobs, and so forth. They invest in buying back their own stock, in bonds, in commodities, in real estate. And they're basically buying up the productive assets we already got and further concentrating who owns them. In the Green Party, our platform, we're going to do something very different. We have a Green New Deal that is not only for climate recovery, it's for economic recovery. And we're going to employ 38 million people caring for the people and the planet. And that is a program that does what government used to do during the New Deal, during World War II, but which even the progressive Democrats can't fathom these days. And that is to have the government actually directly employ people and to make things that we need. And I think that's the road to economic recovery that Biden and Trump won't get us on with their trickle-down economics.
Moving on to the Trump and Biden records.
They'll overthrow you.
When a president, I'm going to ask a question. When the president seeks a second term, it is generally a referendum on his record. But Vice President Biden, you like to quote one of your dad's sayings, which is, don't compare me to the almighty, compare me to the alternative. And in this case, sir, you are the alternative. Looking at both of your records, I'm going to ask each of you, why should voters elect you president over your opponent? In this segment, President Trump, you go first, 2 minutes.
Because there has never been an administration or president who has done more than I've done in a period of 3.5 years. And that's despite the impeachment hoax. And you saw what happened today with Hillary Clinton, where it was a whole big con job. But despite going through all of these things, where I had to fight both flanks and behind me and above, there has never been an administration that's done what I've done. The greatest, before COVID came in, the greatest economy in history, lowest unemployment numbers. Everything was good. Everything was going. And by the way, there was unity going to happen. People were calling me for the first time in years. They were calling and they were saying, it's time maybe. And then what happened? We got hit, but now we're building it back up again.
Looking at both your records, why should voters elect you president as opposed to President Trump? You have 2 minutes uninterrupted.
Under this president, we become weaker, sicker, poorer, more divided, and more violent. When I was vice president, we inherited a recession. I was asked to fix it. I did. We left him a booming economy, and he caused a recession. With regard to being weaker, the fact is that I've gone head-to-head with Putin and made it clear to him we're not going to take any of his stuff. He's Putin's puppy. He still refuses to even say anything to Putin about the bounty on the heads of American soldiers.
Your son got $3.5 million.
And by the way, my son...
Wait a minute. Mr. President, your campaign agreed to both sides would get 2-minute answers uninterrupted. Well, your side agreed to it, and why don't you observe what your campaign agreed to as a ground rule, okay, sir?
He never keeps his word.
No, I'm not asking. That was a rhetorical question.
Can you add back 30 seconds?
Yeah, yes,
okay.
You may have.
All right.
Go ahead.
So, thirdly, we're poor. The billionaires have gotten much more wealthy by a tune of over $300 to $400 billion more just since COVID. You in the home, you got less. You're in more trouble than you were before.
Mr. Hawkins, what are your thoughts on the Biden and Trump records?
Well, the question that Chris Wallace asked was, why should people vote for you? And both of them said, what was wrong with the other guy? And never said, why vote for me? I mean, Trump described how he had opportunity to appoint some judges. And then he interrupted Joe Biden. I mean, Donald Trump, you got no class. You act like a spoiled brat. You disrespected the moderator, the other candidate, and the American people. You're not doing yourself any good. And then when Joe Biden got to speak, he said, what was wrong with Trump? Okay, well, we want to know what you're going to do. I'll tell you what I would do. We would implement this Green New Deal for economic recovery as well as climate recovery. Employ 38 million people caring for people in the planet so we can get to 100% clean energy and zero to negative carbon emissions in a decade by 2030, because that's what the climate science says we need to do. And I know Trump don't believe in science. He calls climate change a hoax. But if you look at Biden's program, he acts as if it's a hoax. It's pro-fossil fuels. It's pro-nuclear for the first time in 50 years for the Democratic Party. We have an economic bill of rights to end poverty and economic insecurity. And we have peace initiatives to end these endless wars and to reverse this new nuclear arms race that ought to be a top campaign issue, but because Biden and Trump both support the deployment of new strategic nuclear weapons and more tactical nuclear weapons than our conventional forces, they call it nuclear modernization. It's destabilized the world so the Bulletin of the Atomic Scientists has their doomsday clock the closest it's ever been to midnight. And neither of these guys has addressed that. And that's a scandal right there in itself. I support Medicare for all, a Green New Deal, and peace initiatives. Biden and Trump oppose all those things. Our platform, if you poll, look at the public opinion polls, more people support our platform than what these guys are talking about, to the extent they talk about anything other than what's wrong with the other guy. So my pitch to voters, why they should vote for me, is if you're with the majority of people and you want a Green New Deal, you want Medicare for all, you want to get out of these endless wars, the military bloat and coups abroad and all that, then vote for what you want and make the politicians come to you.
Straight days of protests, which I think you would agree, you talk about peaceful protests, many of those turned into riots. Mr. Vice President, you say that people who commit crimes should be held accountable. The question I have, though, is, as the Democratic nominee, and earlier tonight you said that you are the Democratic Party right now, have you ever called the Democratic mayor of Portland or the Democratic governor of Oregon and said, hey, you got to stop this, bring in the National Guard, do whatever it takes, but you stop the days and months of violence in Portland?
I don't hold public office now. I am a former vice president. I've made it clear in my public statements that the violence should be prosecuted. It should be prosecuted. And anyone who commits it
But
should
you've
be
never
prosecuted.
called for the people, the leader, excuse me, sir, you have never called for the leaders in Portland and in Oregon to call it, bring in the National Guard and knock off 100 days of riots.
They can, in fact, take care of it if he just stay out of the way. Look here.
Oh, really?
Really? Here's the thing.
I sent in the U.S. Marshals
question.
to get the killer of the young man in the middle of the street. They shot him, and for 3 days,
President Trump,
Portland wouldn't do anything. I had to send in the U.S. Marshals. They took care of business.
Go ahead, sir.
And by the way, you know, his own former spokesperson said, you know, riots and chaos and violence help his cause. That's what this is all about.
I don't know who said that.
I do.
Who?
I think Kellyanne Conway.
I don't think she said that.
She said that. And so here's the
all right.
But here's the point.
Go ahead,
the point
sir.
is that that's what he is, keeps trying to rile everything up. He doesn't want to calm things down. Instead of going in and talking to people and saying, let's get everybody together, figure out how to deal with this. What's he do? He just pours gasoline in the fire constantly, and every single solitary time.
And to button up this segment. I'm going to give you a minute to answer, sir. You have repeatedly criticized.
I have to answer his statement.
No, you have
His
repeatedly.
statement. Wait,
you have
just one
repeat. No,
second.
you've been talking
He
back
made
and
a
forth.
statement.
I'm asking you.
I would love to end it.
Sir.
I would love to end it. and
You know,
we
if
would
you want to
very-
switch seats,
we would very quickly.
We could do that, but
I'd send in the National Guard. It would be over. There'd be no problem.
Okay,
But they
good.
don't want to accept the National Guard.
You have repeatedly criticized the vice president for not specifically calling out Antifa and other left-wing
That's right.
extremist groups. But are you willing tonight to condemn white supremacists and militia groups and to say that they need to stand down and not add to the violence in a number of these cities, as we saw in Kenosha and as we've seen in Portland?
Sure,
are you
I'm willing
prepared
to do
specifically
that, but
do it?
Well,
I
go
would
ahead,
say
sir.
I would say almost everything I see is from the left wing, not from the right wing.
So what are you saying?
I'm willing to do anything. I want to see
Well,
peace.
then do it, sir.
Say it. Do it. Say it.
Do you want to call him? What do you want to call him? Give me a name. Give me a
White
name. Go ahead.
supremacists and
Who would
white
you like me to
supremacists.
condemn?
White
Proud Boys.
supremacists and right-wing
Proud
militia.
Boys, stand back and stand by. But I'll tell you what. Somebody's got to do something about Antifa and the left, because this is not a right-wing problem.
His
This
own
is a left-wing.
FBI director
This
said
is a
the threat
left-wing
of
problem.
white
Go ahead, sir.
supremacists. Antifa's an idea, not an organization.
Oh, you gotta be
not
kidding.
militia. That's what
Oh, really?
his
It's an idea.
FBI,
Okay.
FBI director
Gentlemen,
said.
Well, then you know what?
No,
He's
no,
wrong.
we're done, sir. We're moving on to the next. We're
Everybody
moving.
gives
When
you
a bat
advice
hits
in
you
your
over the head, that's
administration.
not an idea.
Everybody in
Antifa
your
is bad.
administration tells you the truth has a bad idea.
Can I tell you what?
You have no ideas that are
Antifa is a dangerous,
All right,
radical.
gentlemen.
Mr. Hawkins, how would your administration deal with systematic racism and inequality?
Well, that's a different question than Chris Wallace asked. He bought right into the Trump narrative that these protests against police violence are violent. And we know, documented by human rights organizations like Human Rights Watch and Amnesty International, that almost all the violence in these demonstrations is initiated by the police. And we're protesting police that police themselves and get away with assaults and murders and rackets like civil asset forfeiture. And in a lot of cities, they're tied in with the drug trade. So that's what we're demanding. And we do that non-violently when we're out there. Antifa causing violence. No, we've got it documented. The right wing has been infiltrating protests as provocateurs, doing property damage, trying to start fights. And then when the curfew comes, the police move in and they start fights. So that's where the violence is coming from. Now, to deal with the racism by the police and broadly, we call for a number of things. One is community control of the police. They can no longer police themselves if they're going to serve and protect us. We need police commissions elected by the people or even selected by lot, like juries, to represent us in hiring and firing the police, ridding the departments of their racists and their sadists, of overseeing budgets and policies, and independently investigating and disciplining misconduct. So they work for us and not for themselves and the power structure that set them up to do what they do. We want to end the war on drugs, which is feeding mass incarceration. We're 4% of the world's population. We have 25% of the world's prisoners. We have the largest prison system in the history of the world. And we want to lecture other countries about democracy and human rights. We got to straighten things up at home. So marijuana should be legal and the hard drugs should be decriminalized. Instead of going to getting a criminal charge if you're in possession, you get an appearance ticket and you appear before a doctor, a lawyer, and a social worker who look at your situation and see how they could help. Portugal started doing that in 2001, and they don't have street-related drug crimes. They don't have deaths from overdoses, and less people use hard drugs. Meanwhile, next to the COVID pandemic, we had 75,000 people die from opioids last year because they're shamed and afraid of getting criminal charges because they're using illicit drugs. This is the opposite way of what we should be doing. So end the war on drugs. We need to not just defund the police, but reorder federal priorities, because there's not enough money in the police departments to provide what's needed. Homes for the homeless instead of vagrancy charges. Drug treatment for the addicted instead of a drug charge. Mental health experts for people going through mental health crises instead of a clueless cop with a gun that doesn't know what to do with this person. But there's not enough money in the police department to provide those services. So the federal government should invest, particularly in the racially oppressed communities that have been segregated, discriminated against, and exploited for generations. Invest in jobs, housing, schools, healthcare. And that will take care of the street violence, which goes on and is concentrated where poverty is concentrated. We know how to do this. It's not a mystery, and it needs to be done. And finally, to repair the damages done by centuries of racism, we need reparations for African Americans, to honor the treaties with indigenous nations, and to basically provide this economic Bill of Rights I was talking about before, which everybody benefits from and will reduce the sense that different ethnic groups have to compete with each other for jobs and educational opportunities. We don't have to do that. We can make sure everybody's got what they need and has good opportunities.